In this episode of the Orange Nerd Show, we are diving into everything nerdy. We're talking about the firing of Victoria Alonso. We're talking about DC's Shazam 2 flopping hard at the box office. We're talking about superhero fatigue. Is it finally setting in? We're talking about all of that. We're breaking it down up next on OG 55. Welcome back to another episode of OG 55 on the Orange Nerd Show. I am joined by a fantastic panel today. We got Dr. Dre in the house. We got Jay Sherer in the house. Start with you, Mr. Freshly Squeezed. If you could let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
The best place to find me is going to be at VashSky. Right here on Twitter, it's right down there. Just go ahead and type it in. It should pop up for, as Christine Waysense McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55, where we just put out, actually, one of my shows, Freshly Squeezed. Your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh, right from the Grove. Oh, man, very interesting, OG. There's a very fascinating show right here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the host of the Story Geeks here on the channel, Mr. Jay Sherer. Welcome back, sir.
It is a pleasure to be here. So much going on. It's going to be really interesting to talk about and speculate on, and I can't wait to do it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, our favorite drop. Our favorite drop.
Oh, yes.
Perfect.
It's a very fitting time talking about all things Marvel, talking about all things DCEU. I mean, it's a transformative time in the industry right now, to say the least.
To say the least. All right. Well, first on the books, we're going to talk about Victoria Alonso. Okay. So she was number 2 to Kevin Feige. I mean, you can't look. I mean, everyone at Disney must be pretty worried right now. I mean, they basically got as close to firing Feige without actually firing Feige when it came to letting Victoria Alonso go. I mean, that's how big we're talking here with this move. Dre, if you want to go ahead and set the table, and we'll kind of go on from there.
Yes. Give me just a moment here. Let me just okay. Well, I think it's best that we let our dear friend Den of Nerds here kind of intro us. OG, you were very maybe inspired by this video, so I want to go ahead and let his thoughts play here, and then we can, I'm sure, comment over them. Here we go.
But the real truth, guys, and the major reason that Victoria Alonso was let go has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with visual effects and VFX houses. In 2021, she was promoted to the president of physical and post-production, visual effects, and animation production. And one of the major issues with Marvel over the past couple of years has been their visual effects, but it kind of goes deeper than just having bad digital effects. Marvel Studios has a process in which they change things creatively for their stories right up into the last minute, and then they go back to these VFX houses and they ask for clean, fully rendered visual effects in a really short timed window to get those effects out there for the film. This puts a lot of pressure on the VFX houses. Now, the flip side of this, of course, is that Marvel themselves actually give most of the industry work, like the paid money gigs, to these visual effects houses. They are completely dependent on Marvel. And apparently, Victoria...
They share a simian circle, right? This is the thing to understand. There have been obviously complaints coming out of these various VFX houses and so forth that they do work with, but nobody... I mean, a lot of people just really weren't willing to come forward to kind of like list the extent of how bad those problems were. We'll get into them here, obviously, but it's kind of fascinating to learn just how mismanaged this whole operation was and what that led to when it came to not just the quality of the work at the end of the day, but also the people who were affected by it. It's really, really fascinating. We'll get into it.
And it's been showing. It's actually been showing quite a bit in some of the product, unfortunately.
It has. Here we go.
Alonso was a completely toxic, super bully-esque person when dealing with these VFX houses. This has come out from multiple different sources, and I've even had some people close to me that I know work in animation and visual effects tell me that this was indeed the case. Apparently, behind closed doors, she was a kingmaker, playing very political games. If somebody upset her, a certain VFX house upset her, they would no longer get business. And she was apparently just really toxic to that entire process.
And so that's actually corroborated by people who have actually come forward. Some of this information comes on Twitter, obviously, via Chris Lee here. Don't worry, we'll go back to the video. I just want to go ahead and kind of touch on this for just a moment. So many VFX sources have told me Victoria Alonso was singularly responsible for Marvel's toxic work environment, a kingmaker who rewarded unquestioning fealty with an avalanche of work, but who also maintained the blacklist that kept FX pros wild-eyed with fear. She held a crazy amount of power, bigfooting all major creative decisions on Marvel movies and shows. Quote, Kevin Feige and Victoria Alonso personally approve every single shot, all the visual effects work, which is usually the job of a director or a showrunner. One tech told me. Quote, the main one that everyone's quite scared of is Victoria Alonso. And the tech said, if she likes you, you're going to get work, and if you're going to move up in the industry. But if you have pissed her off in any way, you're going to get frozen out.
You know, that's a terrible environment, though, when you're dealing with creatives. Fear doesn't typically produce a quality creative product, right? It's man, you don't want to, it should be more of a collaborative process and not fear-based. But Jay, what are your thoughts on this, sir?
So I can only use part of my own experience as like an example, since I don't know the inner workings of exactly, I'm not in VFX, I don't work for Marvel. But I, like a lot of us, am familiar with the toxic work environment, right? So I had a scenario where I came into a situation where I was underneath somebody who was extremely toxic for the entire department. And I had somebody who reported to that person eventually started reporting to me. She started revealing to me all of the toxicity that existed in this marketplace, to the point where she would be berated and she would start crying because my supervisor would be yelling at her. I had then I started asking other people in the department, like, is this what's going on? Is this what's happening to you? My supervisor tried to do it to me, and I just fought. I didn't need that job, so I kind of just fought back to the point where she wouldn't do it to me anymore, my supervisor anyways. But it created this toxic work environment, much like what they're describing here, right? You only rise up the ranks if this person likes you. The goals are often difficult. But here's what's interesting. In the environment that I was in, we were actually winning at the time. So for me to bring this forward and say there's a toxic work environment and we need to deal with it, because we had to do a whole HR deal, like the whole thing. The result of which was this person was removed from this position. Just like Victoria Alonso was. There's a major difference here, though, that makes this move far easier for Bob Iger and for Marvel in general. And that's that the MCU isn't winning. The MCU is not winning anymore. And so here's the thing. You can get away with being a toxic person when you're winning. Like, we've seen that untold times in sports, like these people win and they're toxic and all the issues seem to go away because they're winning. But as soon as you start to even make hints that you're losing, forget it. You got to cut and move, because you don't want all of the things that can come out of a toxic environment to start just infiltrating all the creative that you're doing, especially when you're working with creative teams. And largely the way creative teams work is when they're inspired. But if they're not inspired, if they're just got deadlines and they're just being beaten down every day and they don't have any sense of control over what they're doing because their agency has been taken away by their supervisors, you're setting up an environment that not only is probably starting to fail now, but that has a bottomless pit of failure ahead of you. So that's kind of my take on it.
Unbelievable. That's not a good place to be in. Not at all.
No.
Go ahead, Dre.
It's not. It's interesting to use a sports analogy real fast. Hey, Belichick's system is awesome when you're winning. When you're not, now the buy-in starts to fall off, right? Like you said, Jay, you start to lack that inspiration. It becomes a real kind of problem. I think that's what's happened here. Obviously, you can be a taskmaster, but even, I mean, it's not even being what is it, a royal pain in the ass for quality work at the end of the day. What we saw in Ant-Man Quantumania is meme worthy. I mean,
Right.
Multiverse of Madness had everybody like, oh gosh, this is awful. So it was just like, what are we doing this for? But because of that extraordinary, mismanagement, disorganization, we saw, many of the budgets listed for some of these films, which were, up in, they were very, very high for quadrant films. I mean, you had stuff that was $180 million, $200 million, $250 million. But then when you have these kinds of cost overruns, right? These last minute reshoots, this additional VFX work that you might need to, maybe you've commissioned work for like from like one or two houses, but now you have to get multiple houses involved. Now you have overtime and all this kind of stuff that doesn't show up in the budgets that they list, right? And then you throw a huge marketing budget to it. These losses that they've incurred are great. We know that. But the question is kind of like, how bad is it? We just don't know. Bad enough to get Victoria Alonso out of there, which, as we've said ad nauseum here already, is probably the best that could happen here.
And as big as this VFX issue is, which it's massive,
right?
It's not even the only issue. There's a lot of other big issues here at play, which is like, we'll get into those too.
Should we play this further?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
I'm hearing is this firing or her going away is something of an olive branch to the rest of these VFX houses. Marvel is really trying to smooth out that relationship between the VFX houses and themselves because they definitely need that relationship to be good to be able to continue to do what they do with their movies. Now, one really big example of where this hurt Marvel badly is actually Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was missing a bunch of key action sequences because the visual effects for those were just simply not done. And this likely has to do, again, with the bad relationship Disney has with these VFX houses. We also heard reports that they changed last minute to make some of these VFX people work on Wakanda Forever, leaving Quantumania kind of out to dry. And in my opinion, the movie is way, way worse without big action sequences. And I think they've even edited it in funny and weird ways because the visual effects were not done. So you see, it's not just the fact that the VFX don't look good, it's that entire process being gummed up has affected the quality of a lot of different Marvel projects. It's wild, and that's the biggest reason as to why Victoria Alonso is out of there. So what?
Yeah, and I think Nerds actually sums this up quite well here. I mean, and the stories that I heard about Multiverse of Madness, and apparently she really championed for America Chavez's inclusion in that film. But the dailies came back on her version of that character, and they were so unlikable, so unwatchable that they had to go back and reshoot, 4 weeks or whatever of a lot of the footage that they had already shot. And well, that pushes back the post-production work, right? And so now you're on a tighter deadline. Now you have to be, you have overtime costs that you now have to incur now because of this and all that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't amount to a great film. Let's be honest, and it just all these problems just kind of build and they kind of build and they kind of build. And now we're sending shots out for, that should be done for Ant-Man over to, Wakanda Forever. And it's a mess here. This is a mess. Too much output, one, but complete mismanagement of this output, two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the last minute changes, and then it's like it's a recipe for what we're seeing on screen, which is not good, So
have either of you guys read Creativity Incorporated?
No.
I highly recommend you both would love it. You need to put it on your list. Creativity Incorporated is about Ed Catmull wrote it. So it's about the founding of Pixar and how Pixar revolutionized the way you could tell stories. And the thing about Pixar that people don't realize is that what Pixar was able to do was revolutionary in the marketplace, because up until that time, you didn't have the ability to go. I mean, you could do reshoots, but reshoots are really, really expensive, right? So there's planned reshoots and this, but a lot of times it's hard to change major story points if you're just doing reshoots. Well, Pixar came in and they said, we're in animation. So what do we need to be good at? We need to be good at being able to change the story as it goes, show people things, have them comment on it, people that we trust in the story group, and then have it go back to the team and then be able to adapt and move. I think that Marvel has instituted, based on some of the reports that were coming out about how these things shift and change over time, I think Marvel took from Pixar's example and said, hey, let's do that too. We're very VFX heavy. We can do some things where we can tweak it later on. Let's figure that out. But what you guys just mentioned, which I think is very true, is that Marvel just created a flywheel that started getting crazier and crazier to deal with. And so all of a sudden you can't, if you're dealing with 4 projects in 1 year, or I mean, how many did they have last year? Like 6 projects they had last year. If you're dealing with that, just tons. You can't do the same thing anymore, because now you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, as opposed to making sure Peter and Paul both have amazing movies. So right. I think that that's a big problem that, like, and I think that what's one of the issues is that it doesn't seem like anybody pushed back, and it doesn't seem like any of this got caught until Chapek was put in, and Chapek was going like, what are we doing? Because we're not doing anything well. So it's, and now Iger, I think this is funny that Iger is implementing all the stuff that Chapek had been implementing.
Right.
And so here you see it again. Like there's more reasons for this, but just from a business process standpoint alone, they've gotten themselves into a place where they can't do business the way that they want to.
Yeah, 100%. And also the big elephant in the room, well, I think we should definitely discuss it, is, there is this kind of ongoing kind of narrative right now that Disney's trying to moderate the company. They don't want to be overtly political anymore. It got them into a lot of trouble. Well, Victoria Alonso, I mean, love her or dislike her, she's been known to be very, very political.
Check out this.
Oh, go ahead.
This article right here by CBR right here. Anybody remember this? Marvel Studio executive criticizes the X-Men name as outdated. This was Victoria Alonso again. I don't know where the future is going, Alonso told Nuke the Fridge. It's funny that people call it the X-Men. There's a lot of female superheroes in that group, X-Men group. So I think it's outdated. I don't know where it's going to go. They just have now joined. This was back when 20th Century's brought into the fold of Disney. They actually have a movie coming out very soon, which is under the banner as their last film. So we'll see what time will tell. So it's like, okay, well, you're taking these kind of classic characters, and by the way, you're doing like you're changing the name of them, which nobody had an issue with, and it has been identifiable and marketable for going on 50 plus years now. You're gonna change that just because the context of the moment. And if you think that is a good strategy, what else have you been doing to the roster of characters that Marvel now has under their belt? That is kind of the bigger story here. Go ahead.
Well, and I always took X-Men as not literal men. Like, it's not just men. It's kind of like for all mankind, right? That includes women as well. And it kind of went without saying. I mean, X-Men have always been a very diverse cast of characters. So it's kind of an odd thing for her to kind of go there with that.
I was talking to Kenna about this. Who Kenna? She would proudly consider herself a leftist. So I don't think I'm telling anything out of school here. And I asked her. I said, "What do you think about this?" And she's like, she's embarrassing us leftists with this. Like, it's just like nobody had an issue with this, and it's just like, it's cringe, like, why would you be doing some of this stuff? But we've seen this kind of, and some people have dubbed it the MCU, or this very kind of progressive era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as it's developed. And look, Hollywood has always been leaning slightly left for, going on decades now, right? But to do it to this extent, to do it with a franchise that has previously been so welcoming to all groups, all people, and never making politics a true priority in any of that filmmaking, outside of the kind of political theater showcases like Captain America: Winter Soldier, for example. It's weird how you would, ostracize some of the audience with some of these decisions here. It's weird how you would take the branding that is so well known and do away with that. It's very strange how you would take classic characters and kind of look at She-Hulk. I mean, does anybody consider the Daredevil inclusion there to be the personification of the Daredevil character that they had in their minds when this all was announced and so forth? No. But yet this is what we're getting. And hey, look, listen, if you don't want to blame Victoria Alonso exclusively for this, that's fine. I agree with you. I think others are involved, but she was the head of all of this stuff. She was the head of post-production, VFX, head of all physical production for Marvel as well, and animation. It happened under her watch. Somebody's got to go down, and it's very interesting how they've insulated Kevin Feige from all of this too.
Oh yeah, well, and it's funny too how, not funny, but coincidental how the downhill kind of trend with Marvel started when she got promoted in 2021. Very coincidental. But go ahead, Jay, your overall thoughts, sir.
I mean, here's what's really interesting. In the course of the last 2 years, I moved from California, where I was born and raised, to Florida for a time. I now live in Colorado. The rest of the country does not think the way that California thinks. Now, when I say California, what I mean by that is largely the centers of entertainment, the centers of the major populous areas like San Francisco, LA, Hollywood. I think that basically what we're seeing is that we are seeing those circles started pressing for. Now, I don't want anybody to get confused about my beliefs versus what I'm about to say, because I think that we should have as much inclusion as possible. I think that we should have as much diversity of stories as possible. However, I think what happened is that some of those things stopped being essential to the stories and started being tacked on propaganda on top of the stories that would make it very obvious that there was an agenda behind the propaganda. And I think that outpaced where the rest of the country is, right? It outpaced where most people are comfortable with. So do I think that's a major reason why she's getting removed? No, but we do know that Chapek and now Iger are both trying to moderate this company. And what does it mean to moderate? It means that, let's just take Daredevil for an example. In that episode, Daredevil does the walk of shame after leaving She-Hulk's apartment or whatever, right? House. Yeah, exactly. And I get it. That's kind of funny, right? But here's the problem with it is that the understanding of the character of Daredevil is an understanding of a character who is deeply Catholic and is constantly struggling with his understanding of Catholicism. So to think that he would do a funny walk of shame is actually out of alignment with what his character would. He would probably be actually shameful. He would probably feel actually guilty about maybe this is not the right thing to do. And where's Karen in all this? And how do I feel about that? But this was just used as purely as a joke. And so I think that, again, it's like these jokes that are being put in place, these pieces of agenda that are being put in place that are not common with the overall storytelling, the overall character arcs that we are familiar with in these circles. And it just becomes off as very awkward. And a lot of the people who cheer it on are the people who just really want that piece of propaganda to be in the marketplace. They're not cheering it on because like, wow, this is such a great story. They are literally saying, I'm so glad that my viewpoint is put in front of me. So it's very ideological. And so I think that if you have an ideological framework that you're dealing with and you shove that into things as opposed to working it in a way where people can find truth in it, because there is a lot of truth that we can find in some of these stories. And now I'm getting into story geeks kind of talking.
Yes.
Then, you can pull these things off, but we're not seeing them pull them off in that way. One of the best examples that I like to give with Turning Red was the My Body, My Choice joke, Well, that was thrown in again. It was a joke. It was done as like I'm going to say this to my mom. I believe it was about like the outfit that she was wearing that day or something. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat or in the comments. But again, that line didn't need to be that line. That line was a piece of propaganda to work that sentiment into that film. And that's obvious. It's obvious that that's what it was, right?
Yeah.
And so those are the little kinds of things that I go like, oh man, like when you say moderate, now I'm not offended by that. I'm not like, oh, I will refuse to see Turning Red. But there are people in the population. There are enough people in the population that go, I'm offended by that, and I don't want my kids to watch that, and that somebody better take note, because those are ticket sales that are going to be going away.
But
Right,
even if you aren't
100%.
offended, Jay, it takes you out of the film. Takes
It
you out
can.
of the whole.
It
It takes you out of the
definitely
whole piece, you know. And it's like, oh man, come on. I mean, it's completely unnecessary. Go ahead, OG.
Well, no, I was just say, like, you know, it's sometimes when you're telling stories, when you have content, sometimes it's better to show and not tell. And what I mean by that is, perfect example,
Absolutely.
right? In the theme park space, we've talked a lot about the new fireworks at Disneyland, Wondrous Journeys, and we talked a lot about how you can feel Walt Disney in that show, and yet the entire show he's never mentioned really, right? And you don't hear his voice or anything, but yet it's very reminiscent of Walt Disney. It really does remind you of Walt and his legacy. It's showing you, it's not telling you. When Jay talks about Turning Red, it's telling you, it's saying it. They would be better served from a storytelling perspective to just craft the story to bring that message out
Exactly.
in a much more organic way.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I think not only was she undermining the efforts of, I think, real storytellers and creatives as it relates to the Marvel side of the whole equation, but I think she was undermining the Disney company as well. The Hollywood Reporter actually features it here. In addition to her behind-the-scenes work, she has been an important ambassador for the studio's representation efforts and was outspoken during Disney's brouhaha with Florida over its 1557 bill. As long as I am at Marvel Studios, I will fight for representation. Alonso, who is gay, said the time. And OG, you were telling me before the show that she was working behind the scenes to pressure Chapek into actually taking a stance on this. Is this correct?
Yeah, no, she was one of those folks that were even publicly saying that, you know, denounce the bill, yada yada yada, and ultimately that pressure led to the problems that we have in Florida with Walt Disney World and Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
So it's like it's Jay, I think you're right. I think the sentiment in Hollywood was outpacing the public sentiment nationwide. And I think that has led to, unfortunately, the studios being out of touch, let's say, with their audience, you know. And when you are in the business of 4-quadrant filmmaking, you really have to have the audience in mind when you're actually making these films. And we hear from John Lasseter all the time. It's like, I don't know if the audience will accept this. We might want to rework some things, you know. And unfortunately, the audience took a second seat to creatives who wanted to have their vision or to a certain extent their viewpoint out there and use these films, these projects as a way of actually conveying their message. Is that accurate, Jay?
I would say so. I would say that it is. Okay, so look, let's break this problem down from and not even talk about what the viewpoints are. Okay,
sure.
There's viewpoint X and there's viewpoint Y. If I'm selling tickets to movies and I'm selling admission to theme parks, I have a pool of people, right? Well, let's add another one: X, Y, and Z. Right? There's 3 groups: X, Y, and Z. Now, if I start selling to Z, and I can sell to a few people in Y, okay, that's good. That's a good chunk of the marketplace. But why would I limit myself if I could sell to X, Y, and Z? And that's the basic fundamental principle that's happening here, is that it's not. People like to think about these things in terms of, because they've been sold something. We've all been sold something for a very long period of time, and that is that our ideologies are of the utmost importance, right? And so we must fight for our ideologies at the cost of everything else. I think that what happens is when that butts up against a business model that says, actually, we're fighting this ideological battle, but it's causing us to lose money. Now we have to rethink. Like the whole core of this business is made to make stories that are inclusive, that bring as many people in as possible. Inclusivity means everybody, not just
Right.
one group. It
Exactly.
means
Not just who
everybody.
we want to include, okay?
Exactly. And so I think that, so if you were to just flip this problem on its head and not use these like the XYZ groups that I was bringing up, but if you were to actually say like it's too right leaning. It's too right leaning. You would need to pull back as Disney, because you want to say, I want to meet as many people's needs as possible and speak to as many people as possible. So I think, unfortunately, that when people get involved with ideologies and pushing agendas, it can start to push towards one group, and they can keep saying inclusivity. But what they don't realize is they're leaving this big swath of exclusivity as they push towards this other thing.
Yes.
And what you want is, we want to be all together in this. There's no better feeling than being on Main Street with a bunch of different people who have a lot of different ways of thinking and feeling and believing that you do, and enjoying wondrous journeys. It's the best. We're all there to enjoy this thing. That's amazing. We don't need, how offensive would it be if one of the three of us saw somebody and we're like, they're not in our group, let's push them back into that store so they can't see wondrous journeys.
Right.
That's so absurd and ridiculous.
Yes.
And so I mean, I'll stop ranting about it. I think it's just, we should be inclusive, and we should not be exclusive, you know?
If you have three groups, and it's X, Y, and Z, and you can appeal to all of them, you should. But unfortunately, the company was like, "Oh, we're gonna really appeal to X, even at the complete detriment of Z." And then Z gets all mad, and Y is like, "See ya," And now it's like, what do you have left now? And X, unfortunately, isn't buying your product to the extent that all three of them were. It's a disaster. It is an absolute disaster. And look, that sentiment, Jay, of ideology over everything, that's kind of what Bob Iger was saying like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
OG? I mean, am I off base here? He was saying, oh well, it's a risk that all businesses must face when doing the right thing, but it's worth it, and it's worth it even if there's vitriol, or it's worth it even if you take a hit financially, right? Well, now all of that tune is beginning to change, and it's beginning to change really, really quickly. So, as we as the Victoria Alonso era sunsets, this is very interesting. I got a tweet here from the Watcher, who I have heard is pretty solid in some of these sources right here. He's saying this. This is the accountability Iger was talking about. Oh, gee, were we not talking about accountability maybe like a month ago now?
Yeah.
When Bob Iger made the whole framework for the reorganizational structure of the Walt Disney Company and announced it at that quarterly earnings call, right? And the accountability tag was right up there, and he reiterated it at several interviews since. It was like, ooh, this might mean something here. A lot of people in Disney's big divisions have gotten too comfortable. This is not a Star Wars scoop account, but the accountability train is taking a stop at Lucasfilm next.
Any predictions? I mean, personally, I think Kennedy, she's on her way out, but it's going to be after Indy 5. I think the story group is definitely going to be on that accountability train. But what do you guys think?
Well, here's the thing, okay? This is the performance for Star Wars films, the 5 that have been released, right? And you can see Star Wars Force Awakens does really, really well. And then Last Jedi, Rogue One, kind of levels out. Last Jedi is a little bit above it. Rise of Skywalker, maybe a little bit below that, but Solo way, way down. And that was the one that was like, oh, we got to think about this. But also Rise of Skywalker, that should have been like a $1.5 billion film, at least. And yet it didn't get anywhere close to that. It just snuck over $1 billion. And we haven't seen a Star Wars film ever since. And now we're hearing that The Mandalorian might be in trouble and all this kind of stuff. Listen, we've been saying it for a long time. The Marvel is at the start of this mismanagement. Lucasfilm is very deep into it. Okay, there's a rot there that's been plaguing all projects, and unfortunately casting a big shadow over every single piece of content that's released. Andor, from what I understand, was an amazing show, and nobody saw it. That is unacceptable right there. You cannot have that happen. So I think Look, if Cameron Pasha is to be believed on his sources via Sparrow, right? I believe the Star Wars Celebration is coming up in London, April 7th to the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, right? And what Sparrow is saying is that, that Kathleen Kennedy is going to be celebrating for her retirement at that event. And the way I would do it is simply this: announce the retirement beforehand, announce the festivities of what is going to be celebrated at Star Wars Celebration beforehand, and maybe don't even just limit it to Star Wars. Maybe make it about multiple franchises. Maybe Back to the Future in there. Maybe Indiana Jones. Maybe some others, right? And kind of be a celebration of Kathleen Kennedy and her life itself, right? Maybe have her out on stage, have her get the big applause, and hey, a 50-year career. That is fantastic. She leaves office in the months ahead, probably after Indiana Jones 5, and that's it. I could see them doing that. Do I think they will? Not necessarily, but look, I think after her swan song of Indiana Jones 5 is released, I think that's going to be the end of it. But I think, Kathleen Kennedy is just where it starts. You really do need kind of a culling there, unfortunately, because what's been going on at Lucasfilm has been going on for quite some time.
Absolutely. Jay, thoughts on Lucasfilm? What's going to happen with this? I mean, Kennedy, a lot of rumors she's on her way out, but I mean, who knows?
Well, here's the way I feel about it. So I generally speaking, I do not like to cut things down into very unnuanced thought processes. But the conversation that we just had about what inclusion looks like is essentially the golden rule. Treat others how you would like to be treated, right? When you don't do that, you automatically start to exclude people from your purview. True. In this case, I'm gonna quote another saying that I think is very, very true and that showcases truth in a lot of ways, and that is, without a vision, the people perish. Without a vision, the people perish. And what does that mean? It means that if somebody can't cast a vision towards what we're moving toward, everything else starts to do what happens at Lucasfilm. It starts to, I'm not doing that project anymore. That's not getting funded anymore. Those projects start to die. And so I think when it comes down to Lucasfilm is I have an immense amount of respect for Kathleen Kennedy. I would say that the fandom does not have enough respect for her. And I think that they are too hard on her in a lot of ways. However, there does not appear to be a vision at Lucasfilm. And if there is no vision, every project's dying on the vine, as we've seen. And the sequel trilogy was so bad because there were multiple visions Rian Johnson had a vision. It went against J.J. Abrams' vision. They could not be in the same sphere. And so without a vision, who is supposed to set the vision? Unfortunately, it is Kathleen Kennedy. So as much as I respect Kathleen Kennedy and I appreciate what she's given me as a fan, she's not necessarily on the right seat on the bus in this regard. There needs to be somebody that says, this is what we're doing. At least, we're going to talk about WB later, but at least WB said, Snyder's the guy. And they went, okay, well, maybe Snyder's not the guy. So now it's Gunn. They're at least giving somebody the vision to go out and implement that vision. And I think that because of that, Kathleen Kennedy has to go. I don't know the inner workings of what happens underneath that, but I can safely say that I think what Kathleen Kennedy thought she was inheriting was a group of people who already had a vision. And so that included the story group, it included included Filoni, and unfortunately, all she got was some fragmented visionary pieces that came out of people like Jon Favreau and Filoni working together to say, no, we really do have a vision, and it looks like this, right? So I think that Kennedy, it's her time to go out. Let's celebrate her for her amazing career and the cool stuff that she's given us as fans. But I think that somebody else needs to come in that has a vision for where Star Wars is going, because there's literally, do we have one movie on the schedule right now? In $1 billion revenue potential, we have one movie on the schedule. Right. That's so insane. So I think it's her time to go. I don't know who else goes with her. Probably a lot of the legacy that also doesn't have a vision or has an old vision, right? Because there's some of that going on. And we'll see where it shakes out.
Well, yeah. Well, and
Oh,
real
go
quick,
ahead,
Dre,
go ahead.
and
Go
you
ahead.
mentioned one movie, and the one movie now is in question with this Lindelof.
There you go.
I mean, it's like,
Per AboveTheLine.com exclusive, David Lindelof and Justin Brick Gibson exit top secret Star Wars movie from director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, according to sources. The pair turned in a draft script in mid-February and parted ways with the project just days later. Lucasfilm already has a new writer on board, though I haven't been able to ascertain their identity. Production is still slated to start in February 2024 via Jeff Snyder. Yeah, okay. I mean, you know, when I heard about this, it was like, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's just, I mean, and look, Kathleen Kennedy, okay. She is. There are creative producers, and then there are make things happen producers, right? And historically, Kathleen Kennedy has kind of been one of those make things happen. Director comes up and says, "Hey, I need this, need this, need this," and she'll get you, I don't know, 20,000 snakes in the middle of the desert, for example, right? That's what you need. That's what you're going to get. But unfortunately, she hasn't even been that good on facilitating these projects either. And part of the producer role is to kind of select the perfect writers with the perfect director, with the perfect project, and so forth. And just unfortunately, that's just not been happening. It's been killing relationships in Hollywood. Remember, this is not the first time this has happened. Anybody remember David Benioff and D.B. Weiss? Maybe Gareth Edwards. He wasn't allowed to edit the final cut of Rogue One, if anybody remembers. Ryan Johnson's trilogy. Where's that at? Right? Colin Trevorrow. Where'd he go? Phil Lord, Christopher Miller. Remember what happened there with them shooting about 90% of Solo and then having to go back and reshoot the whole thing over again under a strict timeline there. We all saw how that turned out. Josh Trank, Patty Jenkins, Taika Waititi. What happened to Kevin Feige's film? I don't know. Michael Waldron, John Boyega, Karen McCarthy, now with her lawsuit right now. It just goes on and on and on and on. And unfortunately, you got it. There's nowhere else to go but look up and say, maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe it's a problem with you.
right.
I can only go by performance, and if you have diminishing returns on Star Wars to the point where we haven't even seen a Star Wars film hit production in like 5 years, if you have burned bridges with Hollywood with all of this talent, if you haven't been able to facilitate these productions and so forth, and you have these cost overruns when you do, I'm sorry, it's kind of like Victoria Alonso, gotta go.
Well, and just her. And this is the thing too, and I'm with Jay on this. I mean, I don't think like I agree with you, Jay, in terms of like I think she's a capable woman with a history that's pretty successful, absolutely. But I think when it comes to Lucasfilm and running the studio, yeah, it's been a disaster. And I think that just her leaving would the morale in this Star Wars fandom would skyrocket, very much like it did with Disney and when Chapek left. It was almost like this what did Reagan say? Is morning in America again? That kind of thing. It's that same kind of energy, That once she leaves and we have someone else in there, I think there's gonna be a whole different energy around this whole franchise.
I think I do think that, and there is very interesting stuff on the horizon, at least in the very short term. This is a story that just came out here. Via the Hollywood Reporter, Everything Everywhere All at Once filmmakers Daniels working on Star Wars series Skeleton Crew. Now, you can actually go into how, to the extent that they are involved. Are they directing one of these episodes, or are they directing many? But that's at least encouraging for something that we now know to be intertwined with the actual Mandoverse. Jay, you actually saw this film. I unfortunately did not. Excited about this news?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so if I go back to what I was saying before, look, I don't see Kevin Feige at one point in time had a very clear and compelling vision for what the MCU was going to be, and we got that vision through the Infinity Saga, and it was amazing. I think that since that time, that vision has begun to slip. So how does that relate to Star Wars? I actually really like what Star Wars is doing here, because Star Wars is saying, look, let's work people who have shown themselves to be very successful into smaller properties that they can actually build a rapport with the fandom that that makes sense, right? Like don't give the Daniels, don't come in and give the Daniels another, like offer them another trilogy, right? Like
No,
give them just let them direct one series that is under somebody else's vision where the fans can go and you can kind of train them up in sort of. The biggest bummer I see coming out of Lucasfilm is when they and the MCU lately is that they're shoving people in with a little bit less experience. Now, as somebody who would love to write for a lot of these properties, I don't have a lot of experience on my resume. So would I like to have a seat at the table? Yes. But I also would like to know that Disney or Marvel had my back and was going to say, let's start you out small. Let's have you work under this person. They're going to start to speak into you in a way and show you what the vision is so that you can write better things and that you can write even things that the fandom will just love, right?
Right.
I don't see them doing that. I sort of see them just plucking somebody up and going, throw them in the deep end and see how they do.
Yeah.
And that's just a bummer for me. So as a creative, I think as a creative who would love to work on a Star Wars project, as a creative who would love to work on a Marvel project, I just would like to enter a community of people that is all there to tell the best stories and have a vision around what those best stories look like. And I don't think we're getting a lot of that right now.
Well, and that's the problem, I think, with Kathleen being there. You know, when you go up to Kevin Feige and you ask him anything about the MCU, he'll tell you all about it. He'll tell you the history of it. He'll tell you what comics it's from. I mean, he'll tell you everything in and out. Yep. You go up to Kathleen Kennedy, ask her anything about Star Wars, and it's all about, well, you know, we'd like to do this, and that has some potential, and we're really excited about that, and well, we just can't wait to bring some of these stories to life. Very generic answer, right? No specificity whatsoever, because frankly, I just don't think she knows Star Wars at all. She doesn't know where to pull from. She doesn't know what works, what doesn't work. I mean, the EU, for all of its flaws, kind of told you, hey, this works, this doesn't work. This works, this doesn't work. You know, hey, Old Republic, that works a lot. Like, you got to go there. That is for sure, right? And honestly, it's only Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni who are kind of like saying this in interviews, right? They're saying like, hey, you know what? We were fans of the games. I was a fan of the games growing up, so I kind of like to put some stuff in there from that. I was a fan of this growing up. I had memories of this. I was profoundly affected by this. They get into debates while on the interview stage between Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni on their interpretations of what George was trying to say with various pieces of their work. It's crazy, you know, and it's like, there you go. That those guys are visionaries. Those guys can map out something, right? And unfortunately, Kathleen Kennedy just, you know, I mean, she had the story group, but what'd they do? They just kind of made sense of everything else was producing, right? They didn't really craft a story narrative either. Just had everybody do everything. Gotta change. It's got to change. Like you said, Jay, this is just mismanagement. And unfortunately, in some instances, you will be putting people out on the deep end because, well, it's because a visionary would know how to utilize those people properly. Like a Kevin Feige, for instance, right? It's like, ooh, well, I don't know if I'm going to have you do my Avengers film, but maybe I'll have you do this other film, and let's kind of work you in like that. And that's where somebody like James Gunn, right? Somebody who had only done like smaller films, got a big budget to do, you know, his take on the Guardians of the Galaxy. It was hugely successful, and they just kind of slowly incorporated him more into the MCU via his characters. It's stuff like that. I'm not saying you give these guys like a tentpole film or whatever, but I'm just saying it takes a visionary to know what to do, how to use the tools, and where to go.
And let me just pick up, let me answer your question specifically because you asked me about Everything Everywhere All at Once. Everything Everywhere All at Once not only deserved an Oscar, it did something that Marvel and Disney both failed at in separate films. It did all together in one film better than two other films could do it. Everything Everywhere All at Once is essentially about the generational trauma of that immigrants face when they move to the States and how those relationships change and morph over time. Yeah. It has this gorgeous story between a mother and a daughter, almost like Turning Red, but it does it 10 times better than Turning Red. But guess what also it does better than Disney? It's a better multiverse film. It deals with the multiverse in a way that is funny. It's approachable. You don't need to have any kind of background to understand it. They throw you into it. It's sometimes bonkers, but it's entertaining and it's very heartwarming. And those two stories come together in a better way than Disney was able to do two separate projects that had more money attributed to each of them than this one did. So it's just, look, these guys are great filmmakers. They'll go on to do some amazing things. And I'm happy to have them as a part of Star Wars. And I just hope that they don't mistreat the opportunity of using these guys.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. Well, speaking of problems and drama, let's pivot now to Warner Brothers and DC, because it's just as much of a mess over there.
You got that track switch there?
Oh, I got it. Hold on one sec. Let me get that for you.
Switch the tracks here.
We're gonna switch that track switch right now.
Oh no! I must have hit that track switch!
There we go. There we go.
Exactly right.
All right. Let's do
Nothing
it.
can stop us now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh wait, speaking of that, hold on. I actually got that one too, Jay.
Nothing can stop us now!
I love that ride so much.
Other than a lousy box office, here we go.
Yeah.
Perfect Picnic was a success compared to this one. Shazam! Fury of the Gods doesn't fly with moviegoers at $30+ million opening. Here's why: Sunday box office. Now, this is pretty bad. This is not good. It says here, now while it's possible for a movie to start low in its projections on tracking, as well as the studio spends the bulk of it picks promotion and ad revenue in the final lap before its opening, the outlook on Shazam! Fury of the Gods didn't budge. And now the David F. Sandberg directed sequel, produced by Warner Brothers, newly installed DC co-head Peter Safran, interesting, is looking at a $30.5 million start in US and Canada as of Sunday AM, off 43% from the first 2019's movie's $53.5 million opening. The sequel also missed its $85 million global opening projections with $65.5 million. And this is a story that's been happening for quite some time when it comes to DC EU properties, unfortunately. They've had some successes, Aquaman, for example, that was a surprise hit. But a lot of them, even when they are successful, they way overspent, so there's no profit whatsoever. On the other ones, they just simply underperformed relative to their amount of investment, which was paltry to begin with. So it's you have had this diminishing interest, but now you have James Gunn coming out talking about, hey, you know what, these films, I don't know if they're going to be integrated in our new saga that we have declared here. And I think that amounted to some really bad results, fellas. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would Gunn's comments completely. And look, they're in a rock and a hard place because clearly they have to reboot or go in a different direction. At the same time, you got the old stuff still in the pipeline. So how do you announce a new direction without completely killing what's coming out? And it did. And I know they're trying to blame The Rock for this movie failing or something. I'm like, no. Gunn's comments, the reboot and all that. That's what did this movie in. But what do you think, Jay?
Oh yeah, totally. I think so. Here you have another case. This is an even more interesting case of where DC has gone wrong. They handed over the keys to the kingdom. What did they have? They had a huge success in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Huge success.
Massive.
They're wildly successful. They want more of that. Great. Christopher Nolan says, I'm going to go on and do my own things. I got lots of ideas right now. Yeah. So they say, Christopher Nolan, who should we hand this off to? He goes, you should hand it off to Zack Snyder. I think Zack Snyder is going to do some really cool stuff. They hand it off to Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder says, I've got a vision. Talked about having a vision, right? Snyder says, I have a vision, but the higher-ups above Zack Snyder don't agree with his vision. And they make him chop his movies up until the point where they barely make any sense. Every movie of Zack Snyder's that's involved in the DC world makes 10 times more sense and is a 10 times better movie when you watch the whole thing as opposed to the chopped up version they made him release. And And he also said, I'm going to take it down a direction that is not a Marvel direction. Marvel is going with this pop culture, bubblegum, everybody feels good at the end of these films. I'm not taking it down that direction. I'm taking it down more of a mid 90s, early 2000s comic book direction, which can get pretty dark and can get pretty heavy. And you got to be kind of invested in it if you want to go this way. And they didn't know how to handle that, right? So they got themselves into this situation where they go, okay, some of our movies are successful and some of them aren't. A lot of that is based just on the chart you just showed, how well the character is known. Everybody who loves DC loves Harley Quinn. But you got to love DC to even know who Harley Quinn kind of is, right?
Right.
Whereas like a character like Aquaman with a actor behind it like Jason Momoa, who was on the top end of his career, likely he could keep going. I mean, he's awesome, but I'm just saying he was peaking at that point in time. That movie hits the top. A couple of those other movies, which are have Batman or Superman in them, hit the top. But ultimately, like, you bring in James Gunn, who does a fantastic The Suicide Squad movie, but they sell it as The Suicide Squad. The last David Ayers movie, which was messed with the studios too, was not great. It was not received well, but you call the movie the same thing. It doesn't make any sense at all, right? So DC doesn't know exactly what it's doing. I think James Gunn knows what he's doing. What DC has to get comfortable with, though, is that DC has to get comfortable with not being Marvel and not trying to be Marvel, because James Gunn's coming up with some weird side story ideas too. But to answer your question about why is this a problem, I totally agree with OG and James Gunn. When you say you're going to reboot a bunch of stuff, people are like, well, why should I care about this other movie? So
Deadline goes on to say, Shazam's inability to fly the box office has largely to do with the fact that there's no want to see among core DC fans in regards to the sequel. That's correct. I mean, those are the guys who, hey, if they're invested and they see it and they gush about it, they're going to get the normies in, right? It's not part of a connective tissue in the DC universe, nor was it ever. And that's the problem that DC bosses James Gunn and Peter Safran are trying to fix. They've been very public about laying out their new multiverse, and it was never made certain that Shazam would be a definite part of their, quote, Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters saga. So that's the thing here. The exclusion of Shazam has taken away from the sheen from what should be a standalone crowd-pleasing movie. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a compulsory aspect that you have to kind of maintain. And when people know, oh, this isn't going anywhere, why should I even bother? Well, that hurts it, one. But two, it's not the most like I guess robust cast, right? So it doesn't have that appeal. It's a B grade cinema score, so it doesn't have the appeal of, oh, it's a really amazing movie. It's not getting any hype whatsoever, and the marketing, I think, was pulled back for this thing. So it's like, why even bother, right? At the same time, I mean, like you said, Jay, James Gunn, probably would have been best to hold off on announcing any of those plans until maybe San Diego Comic-Con at the earliest, or maybe allow some of these things to kind of roll out there, and James Gunn can go, hey, look, listen, we're crafting up stories right now for a new universe that will integrate a lot of this stuff, but at the same time, there are films that are actively coming out, right? If the audience really does want those films to be integrated into our stories, that'll affect the box office. Put out something like that where it's like, hey, support these films, and if they're really successful, hey, we'll pull them in. Ain't no problem. Ain't no issue. But unfortunately, he kind of put out the opposite, where it's like, well, films are coming out, but my films are coming out too, and these are the films that are worth watching. It's like, oh, that's not good messaging. That's a problem. That's an issue. Let me see if I can find James Gunn's comments on this, because I think they're kind of fascinating. Oh, I think he said it right here in this Deadline article. He said, in wrangling the entire DC universe under one newly revised umbrella, something which Gunn and Safran are confident in, the previously Walter Hamada designed The Flash can do on June 16th. Gunn exclaimed on the DC press day back in January that, quote, as everyone here probably knows, the history of DC is pretty messed up. It was, quote, effed up. Gunn expounded that day, saying there's the Arrowverse, there is the DCEU, which split and became the Joss Whedon Justice League at one point, became the Snyderverse at the other point. There was the Superman and Lois. 3 is the Reeves verse. There is all these different things. Even us, we came in and did Suicide Squad, and that became Peacemaker, and all of a sudden, Batmite is a real guy. No one was minding the mint, he says. They were just giving away IP like they were party favors to any creators that smiled at them. What we're going to do from our first project forward is we're going to be unified. Well, that's exclusionary to the films that are currently coming out right now. That's the big issue.
So would it have been better for Zazie to write these films off like he did Batgirl?
Batgirl's interesting because wasn't that like kind of in mid-production?
I'm not sure. I mean,
it was. I think these films were farther along. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So it's kind of like we've invested a lot. We might not make it back, but we need something for the slate anyway. Do we just put these out and kind of see what happens? I mean, that's kind of what happened with Puss in Boots, right? Puss in Boots was not necessarily a write-off for them. They very much believed in the project, but originally it was going to be put on streaming only. And it was like, well, maybe theater audiences might go to this. And sure enough, it made a whole bunch of money, $500 million or something like that. So it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe Zazzy's thinking, we got to get something back for these huge big budget productions, but don't cash out the checkbook when you're doing it. And well, you have some really bad kind of marketing going on with James Gunn and talking about his new stuff. It's just, Jay, I think this situation, there's way too many hands in the kitchen, right? Way too many chefs making all the food. That is primetime number one. But because of that, you don't have a unified message in all of this stuff, right? And so it's coming out of all these different places. Now we have some major drama connected with this, involving Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, that he had something to do with all of this as well. It's like, whoa, what is going on? So it's bad mismanagement, but it's like really bad. And partially it's because, well, every single time they get something going, they can the guys that did it or failed or whatever. So they've had a changing of the hands as well.
They also, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Jay. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, bro.
I was going to say, I think that the other part of it too is that, like, look, you had a Shazam movie. The first Shazam I thought was phenomenal. I think the first Shazam is funny, it's heartwarming, it works, it's great. It deserved all of what it got. I can see them greenlighting a second one. Sure. But look at where this movie was released. It was released after. So what happened when Black Adam came out? Well, that did not do very well. So what did James Gunn think? Oh, I better say something about what I'm doing because I can't leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Well, unfortunately, what he did was doom this movie, because the last movie that came out was about a character that, I mean, only really hardcore comic book fans kind of know, Black Adam. And they go, okay, well, if Black Adam doesn't matter and James Gunn's already talking about new stuff, then Shazam looks like it's coming after a film that underperformed, which means it's probably also going to underperform. And then James Gunn's talking about something in the future that doesn't even matter with this. So there's that was two strikes right there. The third strike is, I mean, I don't know how much they even believed in this movie. They released it on March Madness weekend. I mean, come on, like, I just don't know how much this studio believed in this film at all, and now they're trying to act as if it's some tragedy when it's like, did you really think it was going to do anything? Like, no. Come on.
No. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was saying they're writing this thing off. I mean, this thing it should have gotten a much better production budget than it actually got. Marketing budget than it actually got. And even Zachary Levi kind of admits this, right? Per Variety. Zachary Levi addresses the low, quote, Shazam box office, quote, I think the biggest issue that we're having is marketing. This is a perfect family movie, and yet a lot of families aren't aware of that, which is a shame. But it's interesting, too. It's not just marketing connecting to this film, but it's mixed messaging, right? So Henry Cavill was in Black Adam, right? And they were kind of setting up that, hey, he's being integrated back into the fold. And then you have James Gunn saying, we're totally not doing Henry Cavill. It's not going to happen. So it's like, okay, so like what? Like, you don't even know what you yourself are doing. Why should I even be invested at all? And so it's really kind of undercutting these productions right here. But this is kind of a fascinating thing. Who knew that a star for one of these things might have actually contributed to this in such a big way? Per the Hollywood Reporter, Zachary Levi backs report that Dwayne Johnson nixed post-credit scene in Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Quote, "The truth shall set you free," Levi wrote on Instagram. And this story, this story's wild. This goes off of what the rep, I believe Scott Mendelson actually said about this whole thing, which, guys, you should probably look up because it's kind of a fascinating series of events. But apparently, The Rock was very invested in his own brand at the detriment of everybody else around him, including the franchise that he was a part of, right? And that led to issues that may have undercut not only his film, but also Shazam itself. And it's wild because apparently he had big disagreements with how what was featured in his movie, what was featured in Shazam's movie, a movie that he's not even a part of, and apparently he got his way at several instances on this. It's interesting because we heard that the Rock or Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel had a kind of butting of the heads when it came to Fast and Furious. And I always thought, it's probably Vin Diesel, but now it might have been Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And apparently he's look at how much he promoted himself at Jungle Cruise. I remember him being out there all over the place and really kind of championing his own brand along with that film that was a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if that's such a good idea. This is real fascinating. What do you guys think about this story here? Did you guys read any of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of agree with our friend Alia. I think Warner Brothers is worried. I don't think that they're necessarily just throwing this movie under the bus and they're fine. There seems to be a lot of noise and a lot of ruckus for a movie that they're supposedly just kind of writing off. I don't know. It seems like a lot of drama going on for this write-off of a movie,
We've this is interesting, right? So there's a lot of drama surrounding this film for sure. Like we've been hearing about it for the last 2 days, but then to play to Alia's point here, we've heard of this Tom Cruise thing where it's like he's seen The Flash and he loved it, and it's all this praise and adoration. Apparently, he had a private phone call to make it known that he just loved The Flash and all this, and it's like, right on the eve of Shazam actually being released, you're putting the story out there. That's a little strange. That's a little bizarre. Well, to be fair, I think Zazie doesn't want to lose money. Nobody wants to lose money, right? You want these things to be as successful as possible. But I am surprised that we've seen so much drama connected to all of these films. Is it bad luck, or is there something there? The star of The Flash. You're gonna have to remind me of a name here. Ezra Miller. He's had his own long list of controversies, and we all kind of thought that it was like, oh, how is this all going to work out? Apparently, he's doing very well in rehabilitation, which is good. I think for sure. But I think Zazie believes in this film, like a lot, and I think James Gunn has even said to the effect of like, we can use the Flash in future projects because he kind of is that kind of almost multiverse character in which he can kind of bring all of these worlds together. So I think he believes in it as well. Tying your wagon to this horse, I'm not sure if that's a good strategy. I have doubts about it, but hey, you have Michael Keaton's Batman, right, coming back in and being integrated into this whole thing. They made this a big part of the marketing material for the Super Bowl ad they played and stuff like that. So could be really good. Zazie believes in it. I guess Tom Cruise believes in it, and maybe they're courting him for a future project. Who knows? That's kind of what that sounds like too. It's all very interesting though. It's unusual.
It is. It's very unusual. The Tom Cruise thing. It's weird on the eve of your new movie Shazam 2 that you're promoting the next one already, right? The timing on that was kind of reeks of like distraction mode, very much. I don't know. The whole thing around WB is kind of disappointing to me because I thought when Zazie came in, I was a big cheerleader for Zazie initially. I thought he was going to come in and really give the studio what it needed for so many years. Some real leadership and real vision. Lately, it's been kind of feeling like more of the same. I mean, at this point, I also have AT&T, to be honest. I mean, is it much different now than it was before? I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
It's an unenviable situation. So if there is fear, look, Shazam was like $125 million in its budget or whatever, and they didn't spend much on marketing, so they're probably keeping those losses as consolidated as possible. Whereas Flash is $200 million plus. Yeah. It's a big kind of investment, and I think that's where the enthusiasm for wanting this to actually be successful comes from. If I were Zazie, I'd be hitting up James Gunn, being like, "Hey, you have to tell people that this is essential to ongoing stories in a way that Shazam just was not treated the same way, because I think this film is guaranteed to go down in flames if they don't actually make that point apparent. Go ahead, Jay. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Just a couple points. The first point is, man, I hope that the story about The Rock is more nuanced than that, because if not, then he's being pretty hypocritical. Because now let me say why I think that is. The reason Henry Cavill appeared in Black Adam was so that they could sell tickets. The whole point of that move was an advertisement to get people to see Henry Cavill show up as Superman again. In fact, I believe it was added at a later date, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe
so. The fact that he wouldn't be willing to show up for Zachary Levi's movie is a pretty big bummer, because he got Henry Cavill to show up for his movie.
Yeah.
Point number 2, look, I don't like to see Hollywood. I don't like to see any business start to eat at each other, right? Where it's like, he's not doing this for me and they're not doing this. It's Hollywood has been in a little bit of a downward spiral lately. We're going to have a writer's strike, most likely anytime now.
Yes.
We are seeing production budgets go down. We are probably on the cusp of, we're probably already in a recession, but nobody's talking about it. So Hollywood is looking at all of these things, and I think that our friend Alia is right in that I don't think that this is just going to be seen as when I say that, what I mean is they should have been smart enough to know that this film was going to go nowhere. Maybe they weren't smart enough to know that it was going to go nowhere, but I agree with Alia that they didn't try, and it's not meant to be a write-off. I think part of all of these little scandals could actually be part of their marketing of the movie too, and just be like, "Hey, look, like just have people keep talking about Shazam, right? Like just see if we can eke out a few more views because people are talking about it and it's controversial." But the whole thing's a bummer, man. Like the whole thing is just like, it just reeks of like desperation on parts of many people involved.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%.
And look, when I say write-off, I don't mean like tax write-off or whatever. It's just like, it's not worth investing more in. That's the issue, right? It's a sunk cost fallacy. We've already have $125 million in this whole thing. We know that's not going to probably integrate with our future products coming up. It's not the biggest cast that we've ever had connected to a project. It's not the most well-known character. This is what it is. Is it worth marketing more and investing more? Probably not. And honestly, probably the right call to make. You know, they probably had internal screenings of this thing, and it was like, this is not testing well. So it's like, you know, that's what's going to form our opinion. It's like Harmonious, right? Harmonious, $200 million investment, huge budget, huge barges. This is it, you know. And it's like, okay, well, it's hurting our dining reservations because nobody wants to be out there along World Showcase Lagoon to see this thing all day. Our fans don't like it at all because it, you know, disrupts the view of World Showcase all day. The show itself isn't all that well liked, and it's like, well, we can invest more to fix all of this, but why? Like we're already at this point here. Might as well just fish and come bait, and I think that's what DC is doing as well here. Breaking: Shazam: Fury of the Gods will be available for digital purchase on April 18th, a mere 32 days after its theatrical debut.
Ouch.
So I you see stuff like that, they called it. Those are deals that are worked out a little bit in advance there. But speaking of a tumultuous time in the industry, we got some breaking news, fellas.
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
Per
we got
deadline.
Yep. Go ahead. Set the table, brother. Set the table.
Oh, per deadline. Okay, we're gonna make that track switch just one more time.
Oh yeah, here we go. Here
Back
we go.
into the Burbank train right there.
Hold on. Here we go.
Oh no! I must have hit that track switch!
There you go. Right. Per deadline, Disney layoffs rounds likely starting before annual meeting. Details on cuts emerge. So this is very interesting here. I'll read you just a little bit about this, and then we'll discuss it. With Disney's April 3rd shareholders meeting, a virtual affair this year, less than 2 weeks away, some clarity is emerging about the company's plans to reduce staff and cut costs. Insiders tell Deadline that multiple rounds of cuts are being prepared. The first one is being targeted for next week. We hear March 30th or 31st have been floated as possible dates, but those have not yet been confirmed. According to sources, there will be a big wave in late April described as, quote, the big one, or a, quote, bloodbath, end quote, when a large portion of the cuts are expected to come. This is information varies on a potential third round of layoffs. Some say it might come between the one in late March and the one in late April, while others note that it could follow the one in late April if deemed necessary, and Disney has declined to comment. The cuts are expected to spread across the company's 3 divisions: entertainment, ESPN, and parks experiences and products, with marketing and distribution, including the disbanded Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution Unit, among the business's areas ripe for consolidation. Virtually every part of the sprawling entertainment division is expected to be impacted in a meaningful way, as has been stressed here per Deadline. It's interesting. They reiterate Iger's words here. They say that marketing is one of the areas which they want to kind of trim down on, and I believe that's what we heard with the Chapek era, that they were looking at that as well. This is going to be, they're saying this is going to be pretty big, and it might not stop at 7,000 guys.
Oh, you think so? Wow. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting too that they're going to start before that annual shareholder meeting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
That's risky.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess, and that's I've talked to some people who are kind of miffed at this whole situation. It's like, why even announce that this is going to happen when you don't have the list already assembled? Now everybody's like worrying about their jobs for like 3 months or whatever. And, well, they're not necessarily wrong on that. This probably should have been extended out, but, well, that was when the earnings call was, and you had to make the shares look as, profitable as you possibly can. So when you announce those big cuts, everything, and everything associated with it, as you saw, the stock rallied. That's why you do it, and it's this is an unfortunate turn of events to be sure.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Jay, on the upcoming layoffs? Big cuts coming to Disney.
Yeah, it's a bummer. But again, like, we talk about this a lot when we're just chatting with each other in our group chat or whatever. But like, I keep coming back to the fact that Iger is just implementing all of Chapek's plans, right? Like, this was part of the game plan, was more layoffs.
And the article actually says that, interestingly enough, Jay. It's like, oh yeah, Chapek was doing the same thing. Go ahead, Jay. Yeah.
It's just I think it's wild. I think it's like, so he's moderating. That's what Chapek was going to do. He's doing layoffs. That's what Chapek was going to do. I think the only area where that Iger is vastly superior to Chapek, and we've talked about this multiple times, is that Iger just knows how to talk to all the people. Iger will say, we're going to do layoffs one day, and then he appears in the parks the next day, just smiling at cast members and saying, glad you're a part of the whole show. And so I just think that the way he manages himself and the way that he manages the situation at hand is top tier leadership, right? Why did he announce things so far in advance of when they're going to actually start coming down the pipeline? I think it's because he knows that that's a political statement to his board of directors, to his investors, to say, look, I'm doing what we said we were going to do. I'm on the right track. Nope. The heat on Disney, even amidst all of these announcements, is nothing like it was in the Chapek era, right? Like it is vastly lower than it was in the Chapek era. So this guy is a guy that can get away with it because he's just skilled at being able to do these kinds of things. And so I think it's ultimately going to be, I sometimes get asked by people like, what, are you positive about Disney? Are you negative about Disney? Are we a black pill about Disney? Are we white pill about Disney? Yeah. I'm very positive about Disney. I think Disney is going in all the right directions. I think that a lot of the business people know where the marketplace is headed, and they're preparing for it. And that's what Iger's doing here. He's preparing for the future of the marketplace. Let's just I don't want to get super political here, but it is highly likely that we're going to see the GOP in the White House in 2024. It's highly likely. Yeah. It would be unbelievable if that were not true, to be honest with you. Now, whether or not you agree with that, if you're Disney, you're going, do I moderate and kind of not rankle the feathers of the people in power? Or do I keep pushing the progressivism and just go head to head with all of the political power that exists coming forward in the future? You don't want to do those things. You don't want to, as a company, you want to say, I'm working with you. We're all on the same page. Let's get some tax cuts headed in our direction. That sounds good to us. And so I just think that Iger's doing all of the things he needs to do, but the public face of the company that he's putting out there has been phenomenal. Like, we didn't see Chapek, and when we did see him, he didn't sound good at all. So I think Iger's doing the right things. I think it's a bummer. I feel for all the people who are going to get laid off. I really do. Yeah. But look, I'm hopeful for Disney. I think that Disney's going to get through all of these things. They've always been amazing at storytelling. They're going to continue to tell amazing stories. It might be different people telling those stories. It might be different lower budgets that we get when they tell those stories. Yeah. But we're going to be in a good place.
I agree, Jay. And I think a lot of the fans, not all of them, but a lot of the fans that are sort of like, oh my God, this is the end of the mouse. It's kind of, I think a lot of those fans are kind of younger. They skew younger, and they don't really remember like just in 2005, how tumultuous it was at Disney with the Save Disney campaign with Roy Disney. And before that, I mean, Disney was like Japanese corporations were circling Disney, like in the 80s. They were looking to buy Disney, split the company up into pieces, right? I mean, Disney was going through it in the 80s. Yep. The company has seen a lot worse than it is right now. And that's why, yeah, it's bad. Absolutely. But they're making the right moves, like you said, Jay. And they'll come out of it. This is not the worst this is definitely not the worst situation they've been in. They've gone through much worse and have come out of it okay. And I think it'll be the same here.
They are probably the strongest financial performer in their space right now in terms of people who have parks and entertainment going on. Uni probably has a little bit better of a slate this year. We talked about that in the past video.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah. And it's gonna be good. What were you gonna say, Dre?
Oh no, I was just gonna say that. I mean, you look at you look at like 2001, for example. That really hurt the Parks division really, really bad, and unfortunately, that's where a lot of the revenue came from. So the whole company hurt as a whole. 2012, or I'm sorry, 2008. Right, that was a rough time for the Walt Disney Company for sure. And I remember Bob Iger, saying, "Hey, we're not gonna make cuts. We're gonna move some stuff around, give discounts, all this kind of stuff, keep our cast members employed and all that." And all that has to do. 2005, like you said, Orange Grow. I remember a lot of that stuff happening around that time. If you research and do your research, the 1960s following Walt's death, 1970s and 1980s with the green mailers and stuff like that. I mean, they've had some bad eras right here. And I think this one, and the reason why we're so positive on Disney, even though they are going through this right now, this is the cost for being out of touch with the audience, like Jay said, right? This is the cost of that, but it's a momentary cost. And I think they're paying the right fee, so to speak, right? In getting out of this. I think they're doing the right thing to get out of this. And that's why I think part of why we're so optimistic. But at the same time, we're hearing. I mean, think about the ridiculous amount of change that we've just had just in the last couple of weeks. Bruce Fong coming back and helping out Barbara Bosa when it comes to the head of WDI. We've seen Victoria Alonso be ousted and said, you know what, we're not going to go in that direction. That's going to change the whole corporate structure of Marvel from stem to stern. We've had a new HR director, which will have massive implications for the company and the direction as a company that they're going forward right there. And then we are maybe on the cusp of big things happening at Lucasfilm as well. That's only happened the last couple of weeks, guys. I mean, this is some big news here. I do think they're making the right decisions and making big ones too. Go ahead, OG.
You're right, Ray. These are some big moves, and we're not even into the eye of this. This isn't even like we haven't even begun yet with this, right? I mean, the end of April is when the real meat and potatoes come, from what we're hearing. So this is crazy. But yeah, they're making moves, which we need right now. We need moves being made. It cannot just keep the status quo at all. Right. You have to really shake this up. You have to do something and really make an impact. You know, you got to clean house. Unfortunately, it always sucks. People lose their jobs, but you have to right now. You got to trim the fat. Disney has kind of gotten a little complacent with that. They've been churning out a lot of expensive stuff, doesn't really do that well at the box office, what have you. They gotta rein that in. You know, sometimes, hey, look, I mean, even sometimes you gotta hit like a rough patch to kind of self-reflect and do better, whether you're a person or a corporation. And I think they kind of had to go through this rough patch so they can kind of fine-tune the company and be a better one going forward. So
the day is darkest before the dawn.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, think about it this way too, right? Like in the early 19 teens, we had World War I, followed by the Spanish flu pandemic, followed by the Great Depression, followed by World War II. In spite of all of those things, the Walt Disney Company grew like gangbusters during that whole time. Now it wasn't easy for Walt. He had to do a lot of things while all of those things were going on, but he persevered and he made it through. We are now sitting, people who are worried about Disney. It's like, okay, we just came through a pandemic, not unlike the Spanish flu. We are facing a recession. Maybe it's not going to be the depression, the Great Depression, but it's going to be something that's going to hit us. And then we could hit World War III at any time with all this madness. All of that speaks to a lack of globalization and an emphasis on controlling what you can control at home. And that means shrinking, not growing during this time. And so we're probably not going to see as many international visitors over the next decade, let's say, as we did before. And Disney's got to adjust for that. They've got to adjust for what kind of budgets they can put into theaters. There are the times of plenty, and then there are the lean times. We're entering the lean times. Disney's got to be a part of those lean times. But just like Walt did through all of the lean times in his early career, it is possible, it is doable, and we're on a good course. So I think we can at least celebrate that, even if we are going to be very bummed out and feel empathetic towards those who are losing their jobs. We can still look at the bigger company and go, it's kind of going in the right direction.
Yeah, and you're right. Oh, I'm sorry. And you're right, Jay. Walt did have those lean times and he had to adjust during the war, those package films, right? Like
I was just about to say it, package films. That's it.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like Three Caballeros, Make Mine Music, Mr. Toad, all those films came out during the lean times.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, Fun and Fancy Free, all those kind of things. Because it's like the European markets are offline. That's where a lot of the revenue was coming from. So it's like, okay, well, we got to make money elsewhere. We have to make money at home, maybe appeal to the South American market, for instance, right? And that's kind of a little bit of what that South American tour was all about. Now with Russia and China not being maybe available upcoming, it's like, now you gotta pivot here and do a couple of things to make this all work out. And I think you're exactly right, Jay. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing right now, and it's what they should be doing right now. Unfortunately, there's going to be a penalty that has to be incurred, not just from the changing times, but from their not great decision making the last kind of 5 years or so. It's going to hurt a little bit more than it should have. But it's going to hurt everybody. That's just how it goes. And it's going to be tough, but I think we'll have a stronger company at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And I think that this is actually a fantastic point. Like the fact that you guys brought up those films, that is not a bad strategy for the modern day. As our relationship, as America's relationship to China becomes more tenuous by the moment, we need to look south of us for trade partnership.
Yes.
And there is a lot of money in Mexico and some money in South America. And we can be doing these same kind of tours that Walt did back in the day and bringing those folks into the Disney umbrella.
Puss in Boots, for example, did very well in South America in some markets that are comparable to places like China. And remember, China, you're only getting back about, I think, 25% of box office revenue because of the 2012 trade agreement. That's a different story with parts of South America, for sure. So I think you're right, Jay. I think the expansion of these different marketplaces that actually can be a viable long-term solution for them, that have some sustainability factor. That's not a bad way to go, for sure.
100%. Fantastic conversation, gentlemen. Fantastic. I love diving into all this stuff with you guys. All the nerdy stuff, all the C-suite stuff, the business end of it. Really, really great stuff. Great perspectives. I'm going to start with Jay, the host of the Story Geek Show here on the channel. Jay, if you can let everybody home know where they can find you on social media, my friend.
Absolutely. You can go check me out at Jay Sherer. If you see it on your screen, that's exactly where you can follow me. We have another Mandalorian. These two, my brothers, are going to be back here. Lorena is going to be with us on Friday. We'll be live Friday night talking about Mandalorian episode 4, which we know that Grief Karga himself directed. So that'll be really cool. That's been announced already. The actor's name is totally slipping my mind, and it's like I totally know who it is. I'm like the actor that plays Grief Karga.
It's all right.
And then if you want to check me out at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, it's a little bit more targeted towards those who want to produce their own films. They want to be storytellers, writers of some kind. Just today, my interview with Drunk 3PO, Jay, his name is Drunk 3PO on Twitter, just posted his interview. He's got a Kickstarter going on with a really cool idea for a book. And I think that you will like what you hear if you listen to that podcast. So check that out over at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer.
Awesome. And I will actually be linking that interview with Mr. Drunk 3PO on the How Stories Work YouTube channel at the end of this video. So make sure you click on it, check it out. We all love Drunk here, right? Awesome guy, and really good time. So that will be at the end of this video. And Mr. VashSky, host of Freshly Squeezed, if you could let everybody home know where they can find you on social media.
Well, the best place to find me is going to be at VashSky on Twitter. It's right down there. Just go ahead and just, as it shows up on the screen, go ahead and type it in. It should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the
Robust
discussion right there. I'm still waiting to see when we're going to hear back from her. I don't know. It's radio silent on that front. Can't imagine why. Hey, look, if you guys want to see me on screen, you know where to find me. It's going to be at the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows like the one you're watching right now, Orange Nerds, as part of the person to my left. I think that's how it is. Just phenomenal content creator, guys. I mean, if we weren't a part of this channel, if nothing else, this man right here deserves all the praise, all the credit, all the subscribers in the world. So subscribe for that content for sure. Citrus Corner with George, where we cover everything Walt Disney World. Story Geeks with Jay, where we, like you said, we're covering the Mandalorian season. This season, every episode, and I think we're on episode 4, so that should be very, very interesting to say the least. And well, you have my show as well, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove, and in honor of actually doing another Freshly Squeezed since the last one right here.
But really, nothing compares with a freshly squeezed.
There you go. Right? Yeah, I got to give Adam the Woo a little bit of love.
Mr. Adam the Woo, Mr. Adam the Woo. Thank you all for watching. Comment down below with all your thoughts on the Disney cuts, DCWB, Victoria Alonso, the Marvel stuff, getting the politics out of the company, everything we discussed. We would love to hear from you. comment down below, smash that like button, and stick around and check out the interview that Mr. Jay Sherer did with Drunk 3PO right after this. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful, wonderful day.